Heidi, you're always in front of a beautiful lake. I know that's your actual backdrop, of course. All right. I don't see more ads coming in, so I think we can go ahead and get started. So good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for being here. We are excited to be jumping into this work with you all. So this is our Community Economic Resilience Fund Subcommittee meeting on backbone support and governance. So we've got up to 2 hours today, and I'm going to get into more details about kind of the purpose of this meeting and what we're going to be doing and what we see, kind of how we see the subcommittee functioning. But first, I think I will start with, first of all, welcoming everybody. So we really appreciate your time. I know that it is a very valuable commodity, and couldn't be more grateful for the time that you're lending with us. And we can go to the next slide, maybe, and I will start to set the stage. My name's Evan Schmidt. I'm the CEO of Valley Vision. Valley Vision is working hard on assembling our regional application for the Community Economic Resilience Fund. The Community Economic Resilience Fund, as I know you all are aware, and that's why you're here today, but I'll just give it over just a couple sentences. This is a $600 million fund from the state of California to support inclusive regional economic development, vision setting, and implementation in regions across the state. So we're one of 13 regions. Ours is the Sacramento region, or the capital region. We have 8 counties, which include Sacramento, El Dorado, Placer, Nevada County, Yolo, Yuba, Sutter, and Colusa County. And we're really here today to talk about the planning phase application. So this is an opportunity that comes in 2 different phases. First, the planning phase, and next up, in a number of months from now, will be the implementation phase. The planning phase gives us the opportunity to get up to $5 million for our 8-county region to support planning activities. And like I said, this particular meeting is really about talking about our backbone support and governance structure. This is a really important part of the application, because if we're going to have a co-owned regional strategy, we have to have a leadership structure that enables us to make decisions together and advance the work together. And so this is not only really important for the planning phase itself, but it's also an important part of the application. So the application for the planning phase of CERF is due on July 25th. This is coming right up, as you all can tell by looking at your calendar. So, I want to acknowledge that we're in a very condensed time frame. Also want to note that this is an application for a planning phase. This is something I keep emphasizing. So right now we're planning to plan. We're putting in an application so that we can really put capacity and effort into planning our regional vision, which means that we have to create a sketch of what that looks like now, but we don't have to do all the things. We have to really set ourselves up for success. We have to start to build our collaborative. We have to identify kind of our first draft of our governance structure and identify some priorities across key activities that we'll be doing in the planning phase. So I just really want to emphasize that, because we're all here and you're lending your support to providing some feedback and decision-making, eventual decision-making. And I want us all to know that we don't have to figure out everything right now. So working in this with a large coalition across a large geography for a brand new program, want to also acknowledge this is a messy but meaningful process. So I hope that you'll be patient and that we'll all have grace for each other as we work through this together, because it really is the goal of Valley Vision to create a co-owned strategy with you all. So that is kind of the remarks that I'll make to set the stage for this. I do want to note that this session is being recorded. One of the reasons for this is for our note taking. The other reason is that the state is really asking for documentation of how we're engaging people across the region. That's a really important part of the application process. So we want to make sure we have good documentation of that. Maybe we can go off screen share for a minute, because I want to give us all an opportunity to introduce ourselves. I know we have a bit of a large group, but I think it's important, we're going to spend some time together, that we take the time to do that. So maybe I'll call on people. If you can share your name, your organization, and maybe where you're coming from in the region, then we'll all get a chance to just start to get to know each other a little bit. So I'm going to start with The person to my right, which is Gil Matthew.
I am Gil Matthew. I am the Executive Director for the Nevada County Economic Resource Council. We do economic development in Nevada County, county-wide work. Happy to be here and meet everyone. Thanks.
Thank you. I'll go next to Cindy Newton.
Hi, I'm Cindy Newton, Director for North Central County's Consortium Workforce Development Board. We represent Colusa, Yuba, and Sutter, in addition to Glenn, but they're not in this group.
Thank you, Cindy. I'll go next to Gabby.
Gabby Trejo, Executive Director for Sacramento Act, Area Congregations Together, and we are based out of Sacramento and we serve the Sacramento region.
Thank you, Gabby. And Leo.
Hi, I'm Leo. I'm the Public Policy Coordinator with the Sacramento Metro Chamber.
Welcome. And Dean. Oh, you're on mute.
Thanks. Dean Peckham, Sacramento Valley Manufacturing Alliance, here in kind of also representing the California Mobility Center. So we're partnering on this together.
Thank you, Dean. And Karen.
Hi, I'm Karen Swan with Yolo County Office of Education, and I work in college and career readiness over here with primarily career technical education in K-12 and adult education and alternative education, which is part of K-12, but we call it out.
Thank you, Karen. Welcome. And Thomas.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, Thomas Nelson. I'm a director with Kitchen Table Advisors. We work with small farms around Yolo, Solano, and Sacramento counties. I'm based in northwestern Yolo.
Thank you. And Brandon.
Excellent. Thanks, Evan. Brandon Black, Director of Public Policy and Advocacy for the Sacramento Metro Chamber.
Heidi.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Heidi Hildrum, and I'm the CEO of the Valley Vision of Lake Tahoe, Tahoe Prosperity Center.
Heidi. And Annette.
Hi, I'm Annette Smith. I'm the Director for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Roth Staffing, as well as the current board chair for Project Attain and the Sacramento Works Workforce Board.
You, Annette. And Diana.
I'm Diana Kabori. I'm with Project Attain. We're based out of Sacramento, and we focus on re-engaging adult learners.
Right, Anthony.
Hello, everyone. My name is Anthony Talalieres, pronouns he, him, his, himself. I represent the Sacramento Region Community Foundation as the Director of Strategic Initiatives and Partnerships. Thank you.
Thank you. Doug.
Good afternoon. My name is Doug Libby. I am the Deputy Director of Development Services for the City of Yuba City.
Thank you, Doug. Welcome. And Matt Miller.
Good afternoon, Matt Miller with Greater Sacramento Economic Council. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mark Boomgarten.
Good afternoon, everybody. Mark Boomgarten, City Council person with the City of Yuba City.
Welcome.
Thank you.
And Tracy. Tracy Shaw, are you there? All right, maybe we'll come back to Tracy. Achini.
Hello, everyone. My name is Achini Bandar. She, her pronouns, Development and Strategic Partnerships Director for Grid Alternatives North Valley. Our region, the North Valley region, goes from northern San Joaquin County all the way up to the Oregon border. So we serve all the counties represented here.
Great, thank you. And Kim Williams. Kim, are you there?
Sorry, I'm driving. I'm here. I couldn't get off mute. Kim Williams, Sacramento Building Healthy Communities, and we serve the Sacramento County area.
Great. Thanks, Kim. Welcome. All right, now I'm going to go to Valley Vision team, starting with Alana.
Hello, everybody. My name is Alana, she, her pronouns, and I am Valley Vision Project Associate for the CERF program. And I'll pass it off to Isa.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Isa Albanzania. I'm Valley Vision's Manager of Research and Policy and working closely with the rest of the team on CERF efforts. Good to be here with you all today.
Thanks, Isa. And we'll go to Kathy.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Kathy, and I'm a project associate here at Valley Vision, and excited to be here tonight.
Thanks, Kathy. And Carrie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carrie McDonald. I'm the Senior Director of Business Operations at Valley Vision, and I'm really mostly here for fiscal agency.
Very important part. Thank you, Carrie. And Trish.
Hi, everyone. I'm Trish Kelly, Managing Director at Valley Vision, and happy to see everyone.
Trish. Brittany.
Hello, everybody. I'm Brittany. I work at Valley Vision as an executive associate. Glad to be here.
Thanks, Brittany. And Renee.
Renee John, Director of Workforce Development at Valley Vision, on the road.
Thanks, Renee. Okay, my squares got a little shuffled as people turn videos on and off. Did I miss anybody?
Yep.
Hi, everyone. I'm Deb Collars. I'm a consultant based in Sacramento, and I'm assisting this great team with the grant application.
Thanks.
Deb, I'm sorry. Thank you for being here. Deb's been assisting us very well. So apologies for that. And I also want to really thank the Valley Vision staff who's here. There's been a lot of work that's been put into this subcommittee and others. So, so thank you to them. All right. So the other person I want to turn to who has been helping us lead our listening session, really keeping in touch with us about her community and what she's seeing and the needs that she sees throughout the region and throughout her community stakeholders, and helping just provide a lot of leadership. And that's Gabby Trejo from SAC Act. So Gabby, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about your thoughts about governance committee, some of the values that you bring into it, and then we'll get started.
Thank you, Evan. And yes, thank you to all your staff for all the hard work that they have put. I've been witness to that. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, Gabby Trejo with Sacramento Act. And I know when a couple of months ago, when I had a conversation with Evan and her team, I was super excited to be part of a larger community that is thinking about what does, like a co-owned strategy that advances the people that I work with here in Sacramento can look like. And I had this really profound, like just this image of the work that was done in this region during the census. And so governance, this particular group really spoke to my heart, because I know that I have witnessed what it looks like for our region to both reach those that are the most vulnerable, the most at a seeming disadvantage, but also have a lot of great ideas about what they need. In community organizing, we always talk about how people closest to the pain have the solutions to their problems, right? It's just like, are we willing to listen? And so when I think about governance, I always think of the value of intentionally listening to either those partners who serve a constituents that have a different way of seeing the world, and how do we create space for all of us at a table where we are tasked with reaching people from rural communities, from urban areas, from, like such diverse and not only age, gender, language, all of the above. But I have seen both the Sacramento and the North region and Tahoe deliver in 2020. And I'm just really excited. I would say that I definitely value the collaboration and listening when we look at governance together. So thank you. And thank you for having me.
All right, thank you so much, Gabby. Maybe we could go back to our slides and I'll give just a quick overview of kind of what we have in mind for today's meeting and for the subcommittee meetings in general. And then I'm going to turn it over to Isa to get into some more of the details. So I think we can look at exactly the next slide. So today, this is our first meeting of the governance subcommittee. We're going to provide an overview of the CERF requirements. We're going to talk about the values that will guide our decision-making when it comes to governance. We want to explore some existing models. That means looking at regions across the state, looking at other types of initiatives to think about what do we want to bring into our region and what are some important pieces of that are relevant for us. And then do just that, really identify what we want for the region. We have a second meeting that's scheduled next week. Here's what I'll emphasize about this meeting. We're gonna have a lot of processes to get feedback and to get ideas and reactions to the things that we see. We're not expecting to make a lot of decisions yet about what exactly the governance structure will look like, but we're going to take that feedback and we're going to come back to you with some concrete ideas for you to react to. So in the second meeting next week, we're going to come back with a proposed governance structure, and then we're going to spend our time really talking about that and getting another layer of feedback, and then making some decisions, including voting on it and hopefully getting to something we can all approve. I'll note that there's a third meeting on your calendars. I think it's on the 21st. We feel that is pushing our timeline a little bit too hard, knowing that we have to have this in by the 25th. So really pushing to make our initial decisions or make our decisions by next meeting. Again, acknowledging it's a crunch timeline. This is a sketch of our governance structure, but hoping to get there by next week. So with that, I'll first encourage anybody who has comments or questions, put that in the chat, and we'll answer those live as we go through a really brief presentation, because this is really more of a feedback session. So I'm going to turn it over to Isa to take it away from here.
Thank you, Evan. And hi again, everyone. Good to be with you all this afternoon. So we went over this a little bit already, but again, just quick overview of our agenda. We've done some welcome and introductions and context settings so far. We'll do a little bit of a CERF overview, but again, just kind of keeping it very high level. I know all of you have been pretty plugged into this at this point, and so are quite familiar with the program already. And then we're going to move on to a discussion around setting our values. We have some values that we want to share with folks that we have taken from past listening sessions that we've done that have surfaced in those listening sessions. So want to kind of share that with the group and get folks' reaction to that, to those values. And then proceeding from that, we'll do a little bit of overview of just some existing governance models, some things we're seeing in some of the other CERF regions, as well as some governance models we've seen in our own region for kind of other economic development processes. And then we'll move into kind of a discussion. So either from those governance models, we do an overview, we'll do an overview of, or sort of existing processes that you all have been a part of. We'll start to kind of have a discussion and identify, what are the features of a governance structure that we want for our region during the CERF process. And then we'll close out and just highlight a few next steps for the next session. So like I said, not going to do all of this, just highlighting again those key kind of pillar objectives or goals of the CERF program, which is to promote equitable and sustainable economic development, support inclusive economic planning that prioritizes equity, job quality, and sustainability or low carbon industries, as well as aligning and leveraging federal and state funding to make sure that we're maximizing economic resilience and maximizing this CERF opportunity. As we know, there's a ton of other investment as well coming down different pipelines from the federal and state government. So making sure we're aligning and leveraging those as well. Recap of our region, again, in our CERF designated Sacramento region, it's an 8-county region that includes the list and map you are seeing in front of you. So Colusa, El Dorado, Nevada, Placer, Sacramento, Sutter, Yola, and Yuba counties. Thanks, Lana. Next slide. And I haven't touched on this a little bit, but again, this program is divided into 2 phases, planning phase and implementation phase. We are right now putting our application together for the planning phase, in which each region is going to get $5 million to assemble a collaborative, and with that collaborative, develop a regional economic plan. And then moving into implementation phase, which the solicitation for that, I believe, is going to open in winter of 2023. In that implementation phase, the regions will be competing for kind of the remaining $500 million pot to compete for funding to implement the initiatives and projects that were identified in the planning phase. So this is one thing I want to touch on as well. So, we're here today talking about, we're the governance subcommittee. We're here today talking about, a governance structure for the CERF. So I wanted to call out some of the guiding principles that the CERF guidelines have themselves called out that they want the regions to kind of follow and take into account when they're forming their different governance structures. So those are the three things that you're seeing here in front of you. So the first guiding principle is transparent and inclusive decision-making centered on disinvested communities and impacted workers and actively shifting decision-making power to those groups. Related to that, another guiding principle they've established is that no individual member in the governance structure or collaborative has more decision-making power than another. And the third guiding principle that the CERF very explicitly calls out in its guidelines is including both entities that have traditionally been involved in economic development, as well as entities and communities that have historically been excluded from economic development processes. So again, these guiding principles explicitly called out in the CERF guidelines, and some things for us to keep in mind as we work towards forming our region's governance structure. So we're going to dive in now. And again, if anyone has any questions, please pop them into the chat and we'll be sure to address those. Following that overview, we're going to dive in now to a discussion around setting our values. So the 5 values you're seeing in front of you, in the months of May and June, we together with our partners hosted a couple of kind of open to all listening and learning sessions about the CERF in our Sacramento region. And in those sessions, we had kind of interactive discussion around trying to surface, what do folks think are values that they want to see as part of a regional collaborative or regional governance structure. And so we took all that feedback that we got from folks from those 2 sessions and kind of formed them into these 5 values that you're seeing in front of you. So I'll go through them quickly. So 1, equity, centering on those who are most marginalized in our region. Inclusivity, ensuring that those at the table truly feel like they are contributing meaningfully and belong meaningfully in the discussion, and ensuring that no community is left behind. Transparency, openly sharing information and ideas to build a community of trust and shared understanding. Respecting and acknowledging previous and ongoing work that many folks in our region and our community are doing to advance the prosperity of our region. And action, committing to creating action-oriented goals and timelines and following through. So again, these are values that we have lifted from previous sessions we've done, where we've kind of asked folks to think about the values that they think are crucial to a collaborative, a regional collaborative or regional governance structure. I want to open the floor now to everyone on the call, and just maybe we'll put these in the chat and take the screen share down. But I really want to hear from folks. Are these values kind of resonating with what you see as important values as we form our governance structure? Is there anything here that you're seeing that you're not agreeing with? And also, very importantly, is there anything that you think is missing or is not getting called out that we should call out? Thank you, Alana. So we have, I took the screen share off so we can kind of all see each other, and then we are going to be putting those in the chat so people are able to react to them. Go ahead, Anthony.
I don't have any feedback on the values themselves. I feel aligned with them. I think if you could provide more context on how you plan to ensure or enforce the values, I was curious about that. Like inclusivity, are you planning on collecting demographics information from us so that you understand who's representing different communities at the table, or what other plans do you have in relation to those 2 things?
Lisa, I can jump in if you'd like. think this is a really good question, Anthony. I guess I would say that, this is the foundation of the ship, and part of our work in the planning phase will be to build those structures of accountability and mechanisms for how we both want to measure and enact them. So, maybe what I'd ask right now is really kind of think about these values and the ability to enact them, and the kind of the will and ability to enact them. And then I do think that'll be a really important piece as we kind of build our committees or our subcommittees, and thinking about what does this look like for our whole group, and how do we make sure that we're really living this. Any other thoughts or question on this set of values, Thomas?
Yeah, thanks, Evan. The values definitely resonate with me. I think they're great as they're framed, and I like this simple language with them. It's clear. I am curious where ecological responsibility or sustainability fits in. So I feel like that's going to be very important for, if we're talking about economic development, we're setting a foundation for, these investments will carry forward for decades, hopefully.
Yeah, that's a good, thank you for that. And I also think that, there's the values for the governance structure and how we'll work together. And then there's both the values and the goals for what it is that we'll do together and how we'll advance the strategies. That's hard to pick apart right now, because it's all, because we're kind of opening the door to all these things. But I would note that, maybe that's a place where we formulate some of that core vision and goals, and ensure that ecological responsibility in alignment and measurement with economic goals would be a really important part of that piece. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, that's actually a really clarifying distinction. We're really focused on governance values, but I do think these values are going to set a foundation for the entire collaboration. So it makes sense what you shared.
Thank you.
Mark, I see your comment in the chat. I don't know if you're able to unmute. Do you want to speak to that a little bit more?
Yes, thanks for the opportunity. Again, just historically, it seems that the outlying counties and areas seem to not necessarily get the same attention as the metro areas. I don't want to beat a dead horse by any means, but as we move forward, just valuing what's going on the outlying areas as well. I don't know if it fits into equity so much, but it just seems to make some sense to me, given the discussion we're having today.
Thank you, Mark, for elevating that. I agree. I think that's definitely something we want to hold close.
I see that also aligning with the inclusivity value of making sure that all the folks in the region are represented at the table and have that sense of belonging and community there. And also I'll add that the first one, the inclusivity also, it's like, well, how do you make sure that everyone feels that they do belong at the table? But I think that Gabby's values that she articulated earlier really help with that.
Thank you, Karen. Annette, go ahead.
Thank you. I think that, as a DEI practitioner, all of the values are near and dear to my heart. And I really think that I want to make sure that as we move forward with whatever we create, that we are looking at our projects using these values as our lens through how we craft and design and implement the strategies, always looking at an equity lens. I do think we probably should add something in there around environmental or sustainability. I think we've got the social aspects covered, but of ESG, but we're missing a couple of areas that could be enhanced a little bit.
Thanks, Annette. Any other comments for the group or reactions to these values? Go ahead, Trish.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. Well, in line with the environmental side, the whole one focus of this investment is to help the economy transition to a carbon neutral, or, you know, however we say that, climate resiliency, because that has so many impacts across so many domains of our life. So I think that's very apropos to what you're saying, Annette, about manifesting in the implementation of in the projects.
For sure. Thank you, Trish.
Yeah, so I'm hearing some additions to consideration of the the balance of environment and economy and the transition, and then as well the idea of representation, geographic representation, as well as others included in that inclusivity piece. So I think we could make some amendments there to ensure that that's a piece of it. And Heidi, I like your suggestion in chat too, that it's not just respect for the process, but for each other as well.
Gabby?
Yeah, I guess one of the things I think about for example, for other partners that will be part of this work in the future, they may, the folks that are engaging, may not necessarily see automatically identify the work, this particular work, whatever this is going to look like. Their constituents may not connect it to the environment, right? Or economic. So because for some folks that are grassroots, they're probably focusing on the education, right? Like the pre-work for folks that don't understand how it impacts their health. And so I guess I'm just trying to say I'm just trying to name that piece, right? We at ACT have a climate, for example, committee that's working and organizing around that. But then we realize there's so much more work to do for folks that are directly impacted, but are not necessarily connected to the work, right? That's like the EJ part of the work, right? And the big, I say EJ with the capital J, right? The justice aspect of this work. So I just want to recognize, I think it kind of goes back to what was said earlier around the experience of folks in the rural community is different. And how do we make sure that these values are, as we're making decisions in different spaces through this process, that we come back to these values and say, how does this decision align with this list of values? And so I just want to affirm the list of values listed.
Thank you, Gabby.
Thank you, Brandon.
Any other thoughts from folks? And as Evan noted, go ahead, Dean.
So this is Dean, just one final thought. Maybe it's kind of embedded in here within the transparency, but we always need to be cognizant of how we're communicating with the public and what that message sounds like to the public as well. Because we're all here and we know, but when we're talking within our communities or out in the community, being able to share that in a way that everybody understands and the impact that it has on their lives will bring more people into the fold, shall we say.
Absolutely, it's a really good point.
Yeah, thank you, Dean.
So as Evan noted, we'll take this input for the group, and very soon after this meeting, the next couple of days, hopefully we'll be sharing kind of notes and outcomes from this. And when we come back to you at the next meeting with kind of a proposed governance structure, we'll make sure as well that we've kind of built everyone's feedback into that initial kind of list of values we shared. So thanks, everyone. Thank you, Anna. And if any other kind of comments or feedback in relation to this come up, please go ahead and put it in the chat. We'll also make sure that that's getting included as we move forward. Okay, I think we can go to the next slide. Okay, so coming from that discussion of kind of rooting us down and what are the values that we want to keep front of mind? The next thing we're going to move into is we're going to be discussing some kind of some samples of governance structures that we're seeing either in other regions that are also undertaking the CERF process, or some examples we're seeing within our region as well with respect to the different economic development processes. And again, these are all just kind of examples. Our hope is that in talking through these examples, it's giving all of us something to kind of look and react to and think about, and then we'll move into that discussion after that of what are some of the governance structure features that we want built into our region's governance structure that speak to the values that we called out and that would help our region kind of move forward in the planning phase. So with that, I'm actually going to turn it over to Deb. Deb has been our point person in kind of exploring and looking at what some of the other regions are considering in terms of a governance structure for CERF. And she's on today and will just kind of give an overview of these different governance structures. Turn it over to you, Deb.
Thank you, Isa. What I did was just sort of scour the landscape websites and materials that are starting to be posted across the state in the 13 regions. And, just want to note that everybody's struggling with this, and it's a tough turnaround. It's a sort of a, new world that we're navigating here. And people are, I think, tailoring to their local needs, sort of thinking long-term, what can be durable governance structures. I think it's important to keep in mind that this can also be maybe, an additional value or tenet would be flexibility and adaptability, so that as this unfolds, the governance structures appear to have some, room for shaping things as this unfolds. And as Evan noted, this doesn't need to be, a long, deep, set of bylaws and super formal documents. It's more a high level, the high level approach that the region wants to take at the outset. The first I'd like to share with you is in the Eastern Sierra region. Here, this is one of the more evolved approaches that we've seen. Basically, they're setting up a council with a committee structure. And one thing that's interesting is that they've decided to, as opposed to sort of a hardline voting process, they're using a modified consensus process to try to get to consensus without hardline votes, but with room for those when it occurs. They've thought through how they want to have their meetings. Project decisions would require a 2/3 vote under what they're thinking. And again, that note that the flexibility and composition can change over time. It's interesting, even just noting that they're calling it a council. There's different words that you'll see. Steering committee, executive committee, those sorts of committee is a nice word because it, indicates a group of people, working together. So, and then on the committee structure, it's interesting. They've laid them out in sort of some very useful buckets of work, I think. I think there would also be other ways to use subcommittees that you can think about. And one other structure, one other possibility that I think you'll see going forward is working groups too can be assembled. They wouldn't necessarily have to be permanent. They could be, to serve a need in the time. Next slide, please. In the Orange County area, we're seeing a steering committee approach. And here, the emphasis right now is on the work of the steering committee. So this group is sort of focusing on what will be the task of the committee. And those are those 5 bullets you see in the middle of the page, determining how the collaborative is going to be composed, how outreach is going to occur, guiding inputs to the plan, selecting the projects, and then approving the final plan. So they're setting some very, I think some very sharp guardrails around what this group is going to be doing. And then the groups are all in different stages. As I said, they've got kind of an elaborate process for how they're going to add people or remove them, and thinking about it at the collaborative the high road, that acronym, Evan, what high road?
High road. The official name of the collaborative that the state's calling it is the High Road Transition Collaborative. So that's the coalition that we're building here.
Yeah. So right. So it's kind of, you got to kind of think about it, because you've got this big collaborative, that's everybody who's participating, and then you've got this sort of governing group, and so they are kind of making a distinguishing point there. Oh, I see the name right on the screen. Sorry about that. So the next slide, please. We're looking at the southern border region. And here they're less far along. They're focusing more on the principles that will guide them. They are treating it as an open body. They've got 29 organizations participating at present, and they're continuing to add them. And they're working hard to make sure that they check the boxes that the CERF law and regulations require. There are 12 delineated categories that they're being careful to make sure are included. And from what I can tell, they're using the discussion and consensus approach as well at this point. I think they've got a ways to go. So again, these are just some examples of what people are thinking. And finally, the Los Angeles, the next slide, please. The Los Angeles region, like this group, has formed 3 working groups. One of the interesting components is the idea of working groups that could have lived experience subgroups comprised of residents, small business, laborers, and so forth. And this really struck me. I mean, so often, we give voice to everyone else in a formal setting with, you get 3 minutes of comment at the end of all the deliberations of the formal body. And this was an interesting way, I thought, of creating more space for just lots of real folks. And here, the governance group, you can see what they're focusing on now. They're exploring models, just like you are, trying to identify who should be here and thinking about the nuts and bolts, meeting frequency, and how they're going to vote, and how they're going to reach decisions. So those are just some examples of 4 regions working in the CERF space. I also wanted to just note and speak a bit about the Fresno Drive process. Fresno Drive stands for Developing the Region's Inclusive and Vibrant Economy. They did something sort of amazing down there in 2019. They had an opportunity to take advantage of the Regions Rise Together new program of the new SIB administration, and they wanted to get it done by a date certain in November for some particular reasons. So they had an executive committee of 46 people representing institutions. They had a steering committee with, get ready for this, 300 individuals representing 150 organizations. And then they also had, at the same time, community focus groups of community members, and you can see the different groups that they brought together there. They called it an investment sprint, where they developed, so the executive committee developed a 10-year vision with these 3 primary pillars of again, buckets of work areas, and they developed the investment plan. the steering committee, they use these 2 full-day meetings to bubble up the many initiatives that were already functioning. So they weren't reinventing the wheel, and then whittling those down to the 25, which then became 19, that ultimately became part of the plan. And meanwhile, the community focus groups provided input. I understand this was a intense, very busy, but productive process. And on the next slide, just to let you know where they are now, they are restructuring that large executive committee. So you see the flexibility coming into play, and are currently taking applications to restructure and fill that out. So that's what I have for you.
Thank you very much, Deb. The other one we have on here, and I know we've got Heidi on the call from the Tahoe Prosperity Center. Heidi, I was wondering if you wanted to speak a little bit to, I know you guys just wrapped up your Envision Tahoe process and what that kind of looked like on your end, and share a little bit of that.
Thanks, Isa. And yeah, thanks everybody. I know, so when I want to just preface for those of you who don't know, Tahoe Prosperity Center, I know I teased in my introduction that we're the Valley Vision of Lake Tahoe. So obviously those of you familiar with Valley Vision's collaborative focus on community and economic development, that is what Tahoe Prosperity Center does. We work both in California and Nevada, making this process, we're trying to match some of the CERF funding, hopefully with some Nevada funding, so we can obviously work on the entire region. Fortunately, we did get a grant from the EDA to do a regional recovery and resiliency strategy, which we just completed. So that's the Prosperity Playbook. And when we went into that process, we started this about a year ago. So as being part of the Sacramento region, as you all know, our region is very diverse and we're at very different levels, right? Like Tahoe just completed a year-long collaborative effort to get to an economic recovery and resiliency strategy, much like the California CERF process wants us all to do. So we feel like we've already done most of that work. We're ready to jump into implementation, but there's still a bit more work to be done to get us there. So we think this is a good bridge, but I just wanted to share that we're, in our region, at least up here at the lake, it's a little different. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how we came about to this Catalyst committee. We love the name Catalyst, obviously. That came out in our second meeting, so we just changed the name of the committee. It was boring before that. I think it was the steering committee. But what we did, many of you are familiar with this exercise as we learned it from Bill Mueller. But it's, you basically look at your region and you decide how do you set the table, right? Like, so you get smart people in the room and you start to think about, all the people that need to be a part of a process, right? You can't obviously have 150 people on a committee and have it actually do much work. So what we did is we sort of looked at our region and made sure that we were putting together a committee that was representative of geography we've talked about already, inclusive of all of our community members. So in our region in particular, we don't have a lot of labor up here engaged in our work, but we do have a very large Spanish population that works in our tourism industry, which tends to be lower wage jobs. And as this is an economic recovery and resiliency strategy, we wanted to make sure that we engage those members of our community. So we were very thoughtful going into this of making sure we were very well representative around the region. Government is a big player. Obviously, businesses are a big player, but also philanthropy and education and our workforce development partners. So we feel like we set the table pretty well. And then we went around and talked to people and asked them, do you have the time commitment to do this? Is there anybody missing? So we didn't just appoint those, 30 steering committee members and then move on. We actually had a lot of back and forth in those initial few months. So making sure that we're not missing anybody, asking folks, can you do this? If not, who can? Who are we still missing? That was a question we asked a lot throughout that process. So we felt like we set the table pretty good. But what we learned through the process was, setting the table and having people there and then having them feel like they have a sense of belonging is beyond just the inclusivity part, right? So we wanted everyone to feel like they really had a say and that they belonged in the room making these decisions, just like the usual suspects. So we went beyond the usual suspects, we feel like, and we really tried to make sure that everybody had a voice and that everyone really didn't feel like they were just, there to fill a seat. Last, a couple more comments I wanted to make is we then checked in constantly. So it wasn't just the committee making the decisions. So I have a board of directors that I report to. We had a board resiliency committee. So we checked in with our board members throughout the process in between each of the meetings. We also we had focus groups and experts come together to talk to us about specific issues like housing and transportation, which are key components of this, and broadband. So we checked in throughout the process with others. We also checked in with the community constantly. So we ran a 3-week public opinion poll in the community and got a ton of feedback. Frankly, it was across the board, demographic wise, community wise, very, it was very well representative, which we were so happy about. But it reinforced a lot of the things that were coming from the committee and back and forth. So it was very, very useful to have that input from the actual, residents that were going to be looking at this plan and helping us to implement it. We definitely used a modified consensus process. So we didn't ever have to take a vote on anything. We really, we were able, again, not just because the community was saying some of the same things that our community leaders on the committee were saying, but because we kept vetting it throughout the process. So again, asking community members for input, especially if they can't participate, right? If they can't be in the room in all these, I know we're all used to many, many meetings, but it's important to get the pulse of the community, especially the members that can't, attend an evening council session or an afternoon, government meeting. So we feel like we did a really good job of asking, but, and again, getting that feedback constantly flowing both, up and down, I guess is maybe how I would share it, or back and forth. So I think that is, an overall outline of sort of our process that we used. I wouldn't say it was a formally approved governance structure, and we had some flexibility. We had some members who committed to being on the committee and just weren't able to be there. And so we had to adjust. So, that you've already mentioned that, Deb, but the flexibility that comes in with some of this process, again, and timing. We ended up doing all of this entire playbook over the course of a year. So from start to finish. So we're super excited to implement it now, to get going on it. Our CALIS committee has agreed to stay engaged as we move forward. And the way that we're looking at it now is that they will help us in sort of the beginning of the year, sort of setting the stage, making sure we've got our goals outlined. We were very strategic about making sure this was not a plan that would sit on a shelf, but it would be an implementation and action plan that we can enact. And then getting together towards the end of the year and looking at the measurements that we've set and seeing if we hit the mark. So holding us accountable to the goals that we've set for each year and for each of our different facets of this playbook that we've put together. So that's it.
Thank you, Heidi. Thank you so much, Heidi, for sharing that. We've got just a couple of more things to share before we move into kind of discussion. So these last couple of slides are not so much examples of governance models per se, but more kind of methods for discussion in a large group and kind of gauging or trying to build consensus in a large group. And these models, which we'll talk about very briefly, are just things that we've seen colleagues implement or things implemented in other spaces that we've seen are have been successful. Next slide, please. So the first one is something called a FISTA 5 method, which is essentially a decision-making process for bigger groups where each individual expresses their opinion or point of view on a particular proposal or statement by holding up their hand and showing either anywhere from 0 to 5 fingers. And the things to keep in mind with this method are it's intended to be used after there's been an initial discussion about things, and it is primarily used to gauge group opinion and determine how far the group is from reaching consensus. It also is able to bring kind of to the forefront any objections or any strong objections to anything so that they can be addressed or discussed promptly. And you're seeing in front of you here what each kind of finger represents. So if you raise a 0 fist, it's that you don't agree with the statement or proposal. And if you raise a 1 finger, it's that you feel that there's a need to kind of discuss it further. And in this FISTA 5 method, if you see sort of a 0 or 1, then you kind of give the floor to that person to be able to voice their concerns and have a discussion about it. And then you have the 2, 3, and 4 fingers, which sort of is a range from hesitant but can be convinced otherwise, all the way up to it sounds good. And then of course 5, a complete agreement with the statement or proposal. So again, just kind of an example of ways to have those bigger group discussions and gauge consensus on a particular item. And then the second example, next slide, please. Something called a progressive stack. Again, this is more not a governance structure, but sort of more another kind of method that can be used in bigger discussions. So the idea is in a big group where you have a lot of folks and a lot of different voices, giving priority to allow certain marginalized groups to speak first and making sure they're able to elevate their concerns. So for example, a speaking order could be letting BIPOC participants speak first, followed by representatives of other marginalized groups, and then before opening it up to all participants. So again, just kind of another example method for ways to navigate a process or a discussion with a big group. Next slide, please. So now we're going to move on into the discussion portion of this. So again, kind of sharing these example, I know there was a lot of information, but kind of sharing these example governance models or discussion or decision-making processes. The idea is hopefully it gives us all something to kind of think about and react to. And so now we can kind of take that and also take, I'm sure we all in this group have kind of our own experiences in governance processes that we've been a part of. So the hope is that we can take that and kind of move now into a discussion around what are some features of a governance structure, either from these examples or other ones that you've encountered that you want to see in our region's own CERF governance structure. And to kind of give a little form to our discussion, next slide, please. We put together this kind of rough checklist of just kind of different elements of a governance structure that we need to put in place. So for example, composition and structure, are we having subgroups by function, by theme, by, target group, and then, talking about the meetings themselves, sort of frequency of the meetings, type of meeting, in-person, hybrid, and different kind of other language or ADA or other accommodations, duties and tasks, and then decision-making process. So again, kind of a checklist just to keep in mind and keep oriented towards, what are some of the things we want to be thinking about. So with that, we'll shift over to our discussion. We're going to be doing this in a couple of different ways. So one is if anyone has anything that they want to just come off mute and share, again, we're looking at kind of what are some of the features that we would want included in our own region governance structure. If anyone wants to come off mute and voice something, please do that. We're also going to put a link in the chat to a Jamboard. I think most folks are familiar. Thank you, Alana. I think most folks are familiar with this platform. Essentially, if you click onto the link, you'll be taken to kind of a digital whiteboard where you'll be able to click on a post-it and type in a response. So if you prefer sharing your feedback that way, in our Jamboard, we've kind of created 4 different slides. Alana, maybe we can pull that up in screen share to walk folks through it. So in our Jamboard, we've kind of created 4 different slides, which you can navigate at the top, kind of hitting at the different, again, like elements or checklist items off that governance structure. So feel free to navigate between those different slides. And then on the left-hand side, you have a space where you can select the post-it or another way to kind of type in your, right there, thank you, Lana. So you can pull up a sticky note, type your input and place it there. Or as I said, come off mute, I know I'm seeing a couple of hands and share that way. Thanks, Lana. Go ahead, Annette.
Thanks so much. That was an incredible overview, and I really appreciate the work and the thought leadership that has gone into getting us to where we are to even have the discussion. I think where I reacted was the progressive stack, which I think while I appreciate the intent behind it, I don't think it gives space for neurodiversity and people that process information and language differently, and that may or may not be ready to speak up right away. And so I would like us to make sure that from an inclusive meeting perspective, we always have a facilitator, we always have a note taker, so that anyone who's needs to review the information later, in the interest of transparency, we always have that information available for either the participants and or the public, however, whatever that looks like. And that meeting facilitator is really focused on inclusion. And for those people that maybe their voices haven't come into the conversation, that they are making sure that they are facilitating that process instead of setting aside time for any particular constituent group. As it relates to, and the same thing goes for the decision-making process. The fist to five or whatever, I don't have any particular feelings about that. But I do think we need to make sure that if we have a representative group, whether it's by region, by organization, or organization type, I don't know what that might look like. So it's not so big that we can't function. That those groups need to make sure that they have worked together to develop their own trust within them, so that they can have representation, and that if we agree to something here, that they're going to be okay in the future with whatever that decision was, right? So we all need to make sure that we're moving in that same direction, and I don't know how we do that with such a big area and so many stakeholders. I don't have magic on that one, but those were my initial thoughts.
Just to piggyback on that, I completely agree with what Annette is saying here. I think we want to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to speak, right, and has their opportunity to have their voice heard. But oftentimes people just don't feel comfortable in that moment, and they want to hear what other people have to say, and that makes a ton of sense to me. But I think that if we have a facilitator that's on the call and on our meetings, sort of reading the body language of the room, seeing that there's somebody here that probably has something to say, but they might just not feel comfortable, helping to sort of prod them and give them that sense of support, I think would be really helpful.
Thank you, Annette. Thank you, Brandon. Let's maybe take the Jamboard off screen share. I think folks have the link if they want to access it, and we'll kind of monitor it on our end, but that way we can see each other a little better. Thanks, Alana. Go ahead, Anthony. Mm-hmm.
I was going to mention that both of the fist to five and stack seem to rely on trust a lot, and it puts a lot of weight on the shoulders of those who are representing the marginalized or maybe have that lived experience to be really vulnerable to share that. In a large group like this, where there's not a lot of trust, and just looking at the room, there's not, just from the outset, not making any judgments, looking like there's lots of representation and diversity among opinions and groups, that it may be hard to have like shared language around some of this experience. And so I'm really curious, even in the planning to plan stage, how are we ensuring that representation is there to be able to create and enforce and live the centering of those who are the most marginalized, who here in these spaces can represent those groups effectively, who here feel safe doing that. I'm worried about that a little bit, to be honest. And I think maybe being able to define that, maybe with this feedback. I know you're going to come back, refine some things, and maybe talk about how you're planning to create some action within the values. I think that'd be something that'd be really helpful to me, because I think the values living by themselves, I don't understand the weight of them or how valuable they are without some action behind them. I know for me, I can share a little bit about my intersectional identity. I identify as an Indigenous person. And I think in the governance body structures that were presented, it didn't seem like there was an intentionality of ensuring that, you know, there is representation of Indigenous communities or other subgroups that may feel like they represent some of the most marginalized communities in this region. And so I guess I'm just trying to put a pinpoint to here that, you know, intentionality around those two things, I think, are really important for me to understand how we would meet those values effectively.
Thank you, Anthony. Really appreciate you elevating that. And, you know, I think we do want to acknowledge that, you know, this kind of starter group that we have a pretty good cross section of folks, but we don't have everybody here right now. And that's going to need to be a very intentional focus for us as we continue to move through this. And especially as we kind of start and move through the planning phase, making sure that that is present, that is kind of at the forefront of the way that we're organizing.
And yeah, Karen, that's a good question. We do have a workshop and a subcommittee next week on community engagement and outreach, and so that's going to revisit these values. It's going to add, you know, add layers to that and create some more, you know, for lack of a better term, more meat to the bones of kind of what some of that work and what the community engagement will really entail. So, you know, I definitely acknowledge in the absence of having our fleshed out plan over what we're forming a government structure around, aside from these kind of overarching goals that the program has given to us, it's a challenge. And this phase is a challenge, to be frank, because, you know, this is people coming together voluntarily who have the capacity to do it because we're forming the application now. So I do think when we think about the tenets of flexibility and adaptability as we get into the planning phase, to make sure that we're, again, vetting any decisions that we make right now with a broader group and more intentionality. And I also think, you know, I do want to just keep really acknowledging that this is a sketch that we're starting with, and there's plenty of room to grow from here.
Other thoughts or reactions from folks, or particular features you heard, or, you know, something that you've experienced or been a part of that you want to highlight as being something that we want to make sure we're including in our government structure as we start to formulate that?
Just from a naming standpoint, you know, generally speaking, at least from my experience at the city level, when you had a commission, it had decision-making authority. Committees did not have decision-making authority, and they could only provide recommendations to the larger body. And so if the intent here is for this overall structure to have decision-making authority and that its subcommittees are providing recommendations, then our overall group should be some sort of commission or council, whatever we want to call it is okay. But any of the subgroups, I think we just call them committees. And I think that would make a lot of sense and is in line with what most government entities are used to.
Thank you, Brandon. That's helpful.
I also think having a targeted discussion around that decision-making body. So when we're thinking about this program for a region, certainly going to be, you know, assuming we have some kind of subcommittee or working group structure, it's going to be bringing up, you know, recommendations from subcommittees, but ultimately making some decisions around the priorities, potentially around projects that are advanced to the state. That's all within the purview of this governance structure. So I think it would be helpful to kind of talk about it in a real concrete way, assuming, you know, we're going to have a decision-making body within this governance structure. What are some of the core things that we want to be thinking about, you know, as we think about formulating that, Yeah, I'll leave it at that.
I did really like the second model, the one that seemed really robust, went out, did a lot of focus groups. It did seem like there was a lot of intentionality of like meeting people where they're at. And I think that's a principle that we should try to adopt as much as possible, where we're not assuming that just because we open the doors, the people who come here are the ones that we want to listen to or prioritize, that we really do need to be intentional, use our own resources, make our own selves uncomfortable if we need to get to the communities that we are trying to impact the most.
Thank you, Anthony. Alana, can we pull that slide back up? I just want to make sure we're all pointed towards the same model. Anthony, was it this one that you're referring to, or maybe the one a little?
I think it was Fresno.
The Fresno Drive, yeah.
Yeah, it seemed like, you know, all the focus groups, the really robust, large steering committee, it just seemed really inclusive. Even if it meant, you know, more work, I think it seemed intentional in that way.
Yeah, and I think that's a place that will really relate to the engagement strategy too, because, you know, regardless of the decisions we make around governance, that'll be a whole area of activities as well. I also wanted to maybe on the same theme, draw attention. I think we saw, it was in LA where they had like independent committees for community members, and yeah, each working group may have a lived experience, subgroups comprised of residents, small business, laborers, etc. Is that something that you all think sounds like a good idea, or any thoughts about that aspect, just to react to that piece?
I can speak from at least the way that I saw that work during the Sacramento, when the Sacramento Regional Foundation was leading the census work, was that it created space for folks that work in government entities to create the strategy that spoke more truly to the folks they engage, right? The strategy for the libraries was different than the strategy for building healthy communities, right? Like, so it gives space for folks who, organizations that are doing grassroots work to lead in the way that speaks to the constituents they also lead. The other part that I appreciate about that process is that the lens of equity was implemented even in the funding, right? Is that we knew reaching a certain community just required more resources. And so I just think that I like having, personally, based on that experience, I do like this model. And what I appreciate about the Fresno model is that it's so centered around people closest to the pain, right? Or people who are the most, you know, that we're trying to target in, you know, whether it's rural community, it helps them really, it helps inform the work that should be happening on the ground based on what people are experiencing in their local communities. So.
Gabby, I wonder do you want to talk a little bit about the governance structure as part of the census work? I know that that was a well formulated plan. It might be that might be a good thing to add for everyone's knowledge.
Yeah, and if anybody else, like I know Kim is here, I don't know, Anthony, you might be able to speak to the Regions Foundation's role in this, but there were the government side of the outreach, and then we had the community side of the outreach, and we also had so even one organization was considered the lead. They were the lead for convening other folks working with similar demographic. So For example, La Familia in Sacramento, they serve a diverse group of folks, but they primarily, their largest population was Latinos in the region. So they were tasked with convening other organizations, grassroots organizations that serve that same community. And together they drafted their own outreach strategy. And they, as a committee serving that particular vulnerable community, made decisions about what worked, what needed to work, what didn't work, and made pivots, because obviously we experienced the pandemic as we were tasked with the outreach. But I know that, like, for the API community, they owned the whole strategy from beginning to end. And I know that there was transparency around like how the funding was allocated. And because at the beginning we were clear about these values, right, around equity, and equity doesn't mean that everybody gets the same amount, right? It's just some communities require more resources. But we had report backs. So we both had part of the accountability was those committees, the leads were responsible for reporting back to the general. So we met once a month at the beginning in person, and then virtually, but we were constantly reporting on how the work was looking on the ground.
It's super helpful. Thank you. So it sounds like there was a structure built with a good kind of information loop between those who were doing the work on the ground and those who were, helping enact different parts of the strategy.
Unfortunately, that was before my time at the foundation, so I can't inform it too much, but I could definitely connect people if you want to take a deeper dive into our census work and how it was done. I can provide a little bit of context, though. I was previously the Mental Health Services Act coordinator for Yolo County, and so I have familiarity with engaging a robust community planning process that I hope can be valuable to some of these conversations.
This is Kim. I don't know if you can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Sorry. I'm in the mountains now, so I don't know where my sound's gonna go. I just wanted to add on to what Gabby was saying. During that census process, I think one of the things that made it so impactful as well is we didn't break things down just by, ethnic groups. We also looked at things around disability. We looked at young people. We looked at parents who had children under the age of 5. We tried to break down to the most smallest subgroup that we could get to that's typically marginalized or often left out, to make sure we could drill as deep down as possible. And so I think that had a really strong impact, because we really tried to make sure no one was left out. And we know it wasn't perfect. There's, it's hard to cover 100% of everything, but I will say in that process, we covered a lot. And we were really able to get to, which is why we saw such positive results from the census work this year, because those groups were able to come together and bring others with them. So it wasn't just one organization. So if I use for BHC, we did the youth outreach. It wasn't just BHC, it was 7, 8 other organizations that were also a part of that work and working all together. So I think that also made that outreach piece work so much stronger. And then the governance structure, having the leadership really work with us in those monthly meetings as decisions were being made, that transparency and communication back and forth was also really, really key. So we knew what decisions were being made, and they were communicating that to us. And when things changed, we knew as things were changing, so that we weren't thrown off guard. So so I think there's some lessons, some really wonderful lessons that were learned from that model.
Thanks for that, Kim. This is great. I mean, it's really great that we have so much experience with different models for governance and outreach here in the room. It's super helpful.
I'm just curious, this is Achini. I don't know if this was touched on, but are these committees or that we're putting together for the planning phase, are they meant to carry through the implementation phase as well?
That is a really good question. And I'll say that we don't know a ton about this, the way the state is going to structure the implementation phase and what they're going to be looking for. But I would say we want to start to build a durable decision-making structure that can inform our implementation phase, regardless of kind of what the state's parameters are around that particular phase of the program. But I think, you know, a successful planning phase will result in a regional economic plan and a set of projects that we know we want to advance for the CERF program implementation phase. So yeah, that's what I would say there.
Yeah, and just to emphasize, you know, that nexus between the planning and implementation. So, you know, to Evan's point, we really have very vague, if any, guidelines as to what that implementation phase is going to look like. What we do know is that the, you know, projects and initiatives that the implementation phase will fund are things that have been identified by the region's collaborative or sort of signed on by or supported by the region's collaborative. So again, it kind of goes back to Evan's point, really setting up that very strong, durable, you know, structure and form to be able to make those decisions. And even though we don't totally know what the guidelines are in the implementation phase, we know that that is what is going to set us up for success there, you know, whatever that looks like.
And I think as we think about whatever our decision-making body is going to look like, one, and I think this was talked about a little bit when looking at the different regions, but one requirement of the program is representation across a diverse types of entities. And I think it's 12. I don't know if I'm going to get all 12, but there's business, community, education, government, philanthropy, labor, tribal. Isa, what am I missing?
Community-based organizations, disinvested communities. I can pull up the list now and pop it in the chat so you see that full list.
Yeah, and I was reading off that southern border CERF region, but so there's these 12 categories that are required. So I'll note that there is the call for regional representation as well. We have 8 counties, so we have to think about what that looks like. And then there's the comments that have been shared here that we want to have as much direct representation as we can to our disinvested communities and to our target groups that we know our initiatives are going to be pointed towards. Thank you, Isa. That's much more complete. So that's just something to keep in mind. So as we're thinking about building this decision-making body that you know subcommittees would likely lead up to, this is, you know, even if you just think about these categories plus geographic representation, you know, we're probably looking at, you know, 30 people or 30 entities or 30 individuals representing these interests. So just kind of throwing that out there for you all to think about and make comments on as you look at this, as we kind of get more concrete and think about what does this really translate to. And I saw a comment on the Jamboard talking a little bit about subcommittee, the way subcommittees would be broken out, noting that in the Eastern Sierra, it looked like that might, you know, create some silos because their subcommittees consist of equity. Like one subcommittee is equity, labor, and climate. Another one is business workforce. Another one is local government. Another one is data planning and drafting, and then finally projects. So so that's a comment about Eastern Sierra. I wonder if anyone has any thoughts they might like to share about the way we think about subcommittees as part of our structure that would resonate with us. I'm just imagining our staff drafting something in the next few days. So I'm just pulling as much as we can think of and getting all your thoughts so that we will come back to you with something that hopefully will resonate with you all.
Yeah, Evan, I think, you know, because it is such a broad geographic region, depending on what those subcommittees look like. I think that's in my head where the work would actually happen, whether it's by geography or by discipline. They can structure themselves how they want, but I don't think there's any one, like this group could be the end all and be all and do the work and have that. It's just not possible.
Well, and possible things that we've thought of, we've thought of geography, first of all, that's a possibility of thinking about like how we're representing whether it's county or sub-geographies. We've thought about functional, so someone overseeing the budget or someone overseeing data and research. And we saw another one that did, that kind of broke it up in that way. And we have 4 subcommittees now that really match that to some extent with governance, research, community engagement, and capacity building. So that's a possibility. We thought about sectors when we get into this work, and we're really pointed towards creating access to and creating high quality jobs and access to those high quality jobs. There might be a very specific strategy around food and ag, and that's a high priority, and we're going to want a group of people, poised towards that. So just kind of throwing out ideas of different possible frameworks we could use. I don't think we have to decide everything right now, but if people do have particular thoughts about whether it's representation on those subcommittees or what they might be pointed towards, would be certainly interested in hearing that.
Well, I want to make sure whatever structure we wind up, that in addition to that we do have employers and businesses, less associations than actual employers and businesses represented, because they're the economic drivers of our communities, whatever the community is. So I think they're really important to the conversation.
Thank you, Annette.
I have a question. The question is, there are these other 3 subcommittees out there working. It would seem to me that each of those would have some representation on the governance, and that governance would have some representation on each of those committees, so that committee isn't doing a lot of work that is going to be automatically negated by the governance. So I don't know whether that was a notion about making sure that you have that or not.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, I think we'll want to, whatever subcommittee structure we have, we'll want to make sure there's representation of those subcommittees that goes to the decision-making body. And so that they're, and I saw that the way the Eastern Sierra had it, and I thought this made sense, was that each subcommittee, which they said there were 7 members of each subcommittee, 7 voting members, and anybody can attend those. So it's a public meeting that anybody can attend. And there's 1 liaison per committee that is a part of their council. So, making sure that there's both voting rights and a lot of communication from subcommittees to the council.
And Evan, I think that from my perspective, that makes a whole lot of sense, right? Because then you ensure that all of those subcommittee groups, right, that we've identified as important stakeholders and important voices don't get lost in that larger group discussion, right? So I think that makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Josh.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, we had a project several years ago that was funded by the Economic Development Administration. It was across the whole Central Valley. So we had subregions and we had topical areas like workforce and infrastructure. And so we sort of had a governing council, or whatever you want to call it, that had a representation from each group, so that you didn't necessarily have to populate across the groups. You could just have a representative from each group in sort of a governance council above, or a coordinating committee. So that's another way. And you could design that then maybe into the governance structure.
All right, I'm going to keep kind of pushing on some of these concrete questions. One thing we'll want to indicate is a comment about, do we value hybrid meetings? Do we value in-person meetings? How do we want to think about you know, representation across the region. It's a large region. So if we're having in person, we'd have to travel around. So just I'm gonna throw that out there. Any comments anyone would want to share about that?
Yeah, particularly to that point, Evan, I think that I love meeting in person. I think it is super helpful. However, considering the large geographic area that we're talking about here, I think some sort of a hybrid option would be certainly my preference, right? So those of us that want to or can get in person can, and those that don't or don't feel comfortable or whatever the case is, they have that option too. But I also think that, you know, in terms of spreading the love around a little bit, if we're going to do those in-person meetings, maybe there's an option to do them in different parts of the region when we do those, or maybe it's virtual, but every quarter we go somewhere, you know, different. We go somewhere where the rest of the group is at. So that's sort of my perspective on that, sort of that blend of both options, and then going out to our other parts of our community, I think would be really great.
Great, thanks, Brandon. Chini, is that a +1 to what Brandon was saying?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I think that I love meeting in person, but I will say I have not been in a single hybrid meeting where the meeting room is set up to really accommodate the virtual aspect. You cannot hear the people in the room, you can't see the people in the room. And so if we go down that path, you need to be really thoughtful about who's hosting and are they really structured to accommodate a hybrid model.
Yeah. And maybe part of the hybrid is just being really strategic about what's virtual and what's in person. So maybe there's a longer kickoff meeting that's in person, and there's food, and it's great, and it's in a place that is central, and you know, and then it's virtual meetings, and you know, so we have some check-ins that are in person, but also really rely on the convenience of virtual, because that's that, you know, that works for a lot of people. And I would agree with Brandon. It's nice to have the in-person option, and also with the net that hybrid can be really challenging.
Well, virtual lends itself to greater diversity. So for those that maybe have mobility issues or other communication challenges, that I'm assuming that since we've been doing this for a few years now, that people have worked through those requirements for themselves. So,
yeah.
I think that's true. And, you know, we need to figure out how to build trust in this whole process. And I think I love virtual because I'm in a rural area. It takes me 45 minutes to get anywhere. And I think we really need to be focusing on how we're building trust. And I think being in person is a great way to do that. And so thinking about, I know there's a question around budget, but you know, if we really are reaching groups that are the most marginalized, people that are most marginalized, we need to be thinking about how we reduce barriers for people to be able to participate either virtually or in person. And so just really thinking about, you know, where financing might be needed in order to, remove some of those barriers.
Great, thank you, Thomas.
I think a great way to not build trust, or a great way to build trust, a hybrid meeting is a great way to build trust among the folks that can get there in person. But like Annette was saying, the folks virtual are often not included in that. So something to keep in mind. But it also goes back to that facilitator that we've talked about before, being really important.
Yeah,
I totally agree that you know, in a hybrid scenario, certainly that facilitator is going to be super, super important. But then Trish brought up a good point in the chat too. Of course, Trish did. We're talking about broadband stuff, makes a lot of sense. We do have folks in some of our rural communities that don't have adequate enough internet access, right? And so we want to be inclusive of those folks too. So it's going to be a challenge, but I think it's one that we can certainly work out.
And for the population that we're trying to target, those who are maybe most underrepresented, we need to be cognizant of when we're holding these meetings. 4 o'clock in the afternoon for most people probably isn't going to work. So, you know, I think we're going to be back to our evening meeting schedules if we're going to be truly inclusive.
This is great. And if you're not on the Jamboard, we have staff who's typing and putting all these comments in. So really appreciate the conversation, and we're capturing it and recording it. So great feedback. Next category that we have is on stipends and compensation. So this is for participating in the governance. So wonder if anybody has any thoughts or principles, any things we want to make sure that we're thinking about as we think about how we're supporting capacity for people to be able to participate in leadership or in subcommittees, to be able to meaningfully be a part of this collaborative.
Apologies if this was already gone over, but how have some of those other groups tackled that particular issue in terms of stipends?
I know that we have, I don't know that they've gotten to that point of figuring that out, or that we have that information. Deb, have you heard anything from how, at least from the other regions or from the Fresno Drive effort?
I know that in Fresno, the third tier of inputs from the targeted working groups received gift cards for their participation in the 2-hour workshops. I think there were $15 gift cards. I also am we should maybe research this, because I'm remembering something in the Q&A, the lengthy Q&A, that there's some kind of $100 limit. Carrie, does that ring a bell?
For meeting?
Yeah.
Well, can I also differentiate compensation for representation versus stipends? I think they're two separate things. So if you're in a leadership council and doing, let's say, a monthly meeting, that's a different type of I don't think that's a stipend structure as much as it is a compensation structure. Am I wrong about that, Carrie, or is that all in the same bucket?
They actually could be different buckets.
Okay. And when I'm reading what Eastern Sierra wrote about it, and that is stipends will be available to voting members who are non-elected officials and allowed to accept payment for meeting and committee obligations. Stipends are optional and intended to increase participation from stakeholders with lower resources or capacity to engage in the CERF process. Mileage and lodging costs will be reimbursed for all participating voting members if approved in advance. So just as an example, that's how they, in a very succinct way, described their thoughts around that.
I know that locally, a lot of the boards and commissions that, Public Library Authority, SAFCA, those sort of groups, the non-elected officials receive somewhere between $50 and $100 stipends. The elected officials also receive that stipend, but it goes back to their jurisdiction. So like you get $100 for sitting on the library authority, you're a council member in the city of Sacramento. The city of Sacramento actually gets that $100 check. So it is a common practice in the region already. It's something that those boards and commissions already do. Maybe we should look into sort of how that's structured.
Yeah, we Sierra Nevada Journeys, when I was with them, we conducted a community needs assessment, and the way that we handled compensation was for any individual. So for example, students or parents who participated, it was a direct gift card type of option, but for any organizational CBO leadership personnel who participated, it was a check to their organization because they were taking time from their work, even if you're representing your organization, particularly if it involves, ongoing multi-year kind of community involvement. I think we're going to have to figure out how the funding will be divvied up in general in terms of how the planning will be administered. But one of the ways, I think this is the same thing that Brandon said, but that it worked very well for us in our process.
And I guess the difference between stipends and compensation, I'm also thinking about, let's say if you're chairing a committee and you don't only have your meetings, but you also have the time it takes to prep. And so I think there's we'll have to consider kind of what that overall package looks like for highly involved organizations who need that capacity support to be able to participate. Okay, Issa, when it comes to just kind of the nuts and bolts of what we know we're going to be trying to put together, what else that we haven't talked about do we need?
So another kind of in this meeting category, interested in hearing folks' thoughts around, and some of this was shared around accommodations, for example. You know, we know kind of broadly that we want to make sure we're taking a multilingual approach, for example. So just thoughts around things of that nature as we're kind of running and staffing these meetings. What are things that folks want to make sure we're keeping in mind we're going through those processes?
I'll be honest, I feel like I'm getting a little confused because it seems like we are starting with this group, which seemed like just from the intros, a group of people who are engaged in this process, maybe because of their organizations or their work. And maybe this is a part of their work in building partnership or being advocates in the community. But it sounds like we're also trying to be inclusive of bringing in people who maybe be able to inform some of our decision making and have them be a part of the committees in some capacity. And so that seems like it would maybe change the dynamic and structure of these groups a little bit. I guess as a baseline, I'd be curious if that's the approach we're trying to get and trying to make this more inclusive, because then it'll help me understand what our goals are related to the group. And also maybe if there was some transparency, do you all have like a budget for the community planning process or this planning process that could help us understand the restraints so that I could understand and help understand how to prioritize some of those dollars? I know for me, however long I'd be engaged as a representative of the foundation and I would not want any compensation. I think the money would want to just be given back to those who could maximize the impact on the grant dollars. If you're pulling from the grant dollars, that's one piece, but if Valley Vision is pulling something separate from like unrestricted funds, or you all have a resource that's pulling from this, that would help me understand it a little differently.
Yeah, so the high level number that our region has for planning is $5 million. Part of this process is about prioritizing what kind of buckets of activities funding will go into. So we're kind of informing that right now, and we will certainly come back to you with thoughts around what, you know, tasks kind of across our tasks and buckets of activities, what that budget would look like. I do think I agree there's maybe two different things trying to be accomplished here. One is, you know, if you look at the stakeholder list of who we have to include, you know, which it's a lot of organizations, right? It's probably, you know, people who are on this call now, and it's people who are representing their organizations, whether it's labor, community-based organizations, employers, or others. So that's going to be a piece of our decision-making body and our subcommittees, certainly, that we're going to have those, you know, those players, including our local government, our workforce, our higher ed. I think it's also helpful for us to get feedback to think about accessibility and other things, because we do want we want to contemplate direct engagement from those with lived experience and those organizations who serve them, who need capacity support to be able to participate. So I think it's a little bit of, you know, for those of us who are in, like you at the foundation, or maybe some of our local government partners or others who aren't particularly looking for funding to support their participation. I think that's, you know, that's going to exist. That will be there. I think there'll be organizations that need support and accommodations. And I think that if we think about, you know, we talked about the model of lived experience subcommittee groups or focus groups, or different ways we'll kind of tie in the community engagement to the decision-making structure. We do want to think about how we're making the appropriate accommodations and kind of building the ability for people to participate. And I acknowledge that there's not a satisfying level of specificity as we're planning all of this. And this is, you know, this is what we're building all together, and we will get there, but it will require a little bit of patience. Okay, Annette, I'm looking forward to, I just opened this tab. I'm looking forward to looking at this virtual meetings resource. I know we're getting really close to 6 o'clock, and we've gotten a lot of really valuable feedback from you all. I want to maybe leave just a minute to open the space for anybody else who has anything they want to add. And then maybe we'll turn to Isa to talk about some of the concrete next steps, and then we can go ahead and wrap up. So on that note, any final comments or thoughts from people as we start to kind of put together the feedback that you've shared?
Just quickly, I just want to thank the Valley Vision team for putting all this together and coordinating all of our thoughts and ideas and putting it all in one space for us to look at, next week. And just super appreciate all you guys are doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brandon.
Technical question. How long is the Jamboard accessible? If we wanted to go in and provide comments after this?
Maybe I was going to suggest maybe end of day Friday, just so that when we're putting our stuff together.
Let's be reasonable. Yeah. But so if we have another day to go in and fill in some blanks, that would be appreciated.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
For sure. I guess this goes into next steps as well. We're going to make sure, in addition to making sure you all have all these materials and resources that we've touched on, we're going to create some avenues for folks to provide additional feedback on those questions that we've talked about today. Just acknowledging that some really kind of big, heavy-hitting questions we're asking folks to contemplate in the moment, which is, I think, a lot and overwhelming, and, certainly not expecting folks to come out with full list of ideas right in the moment, and also that there are quite a few folks who expressed interest in this committee, but for time constraints and other reasons couldn't make it here or couldn't attend today. So part of our follow-up in the next couple of days is going to be, in addition to sharing the materials, either a link to a survey. There will be some avenue for you to click on and provide additional feedback. We'll share the link to this Jamboard as well. So as you're kind of going through the materials and thinking a little bit about more what we've discussed today as ideas are coming to you, you have a space to share that. So I want to make that clear to folks. Annette, go ahead.
Thanks. I just, I'm with Brandon and the rest of the group. I think this was a great start. It does feel really big to me. And I think one of the ways to keep it manageable is to look at the intersections of interest in people. We have another large collaborative with the K-16 grant happening currently. So where might we have synergies of people that we could tap into that understand kind of the big picture of what's happening in the broader region, and have them do dual duty if possible in some of this work, so that we don't wind up with 250 people on this call in the future.
Absolutely.
Because I'm kind of freaked out right now.
Well, we did start this, that it's going to be a big messy process. And I will say that, our commitment is to transparency. It's to an open process. It's to really being true to the values of the program itself, which is creating an inclusive vision that's co-owned and that incorporates voices that are usually excluded from these processes. So we're going step by step. I hear all, I do think that it's big things that we're asking of you all. Really appreciate your patience for 2 hours of us picking your brains and continuing to kind of try to pull feedback from you. It's a lot to think about in the moment. So we'll continue to kind of share. I hope you can keep thinking about it. Annette, certainly we're tuned in with not only K through 16, but a number of other, big processes that are going on. And I think it'll be really important that our governance structure ties to these important initiatives, even if those individuals aren't in the room today.
Agreed.
All right. Well, with that, I think unless there's anything else, Isa, that we need to cover. Okay.
Just a quick recap again. So as we said, we'll come back to you folks the next couple of days with some follow-up materials and links to provide feedback. In terms of next steps, we have that second meeting coming up as well next week on the 14th. At that meeting, our goal is to come to you with sort of a proposed kind of clear governance structure, at least the bones of one, for folks to provide feedback to and react to, and then we'll channel that into our application. So that's where we are in terms of next steps. And thanks all for coming and working with us as we navigate through this.
Yeah, really want to thank you. I continue to think this is a really big opportunity for our region. I'm excited about it, and we can't do it without all of you. So thank you. Thank you very much. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks.